بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم أما بعد اللهم نور قلوبنا بنور هديك سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم تقبل منا وزدنا علما يا أرحم الراحمين ووفقنا لاتباع سنة نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم آمين ثم آمين. So, alhamdulillah, this is the first class going over the Arba'un, and I think that being the first class, all we're going to do tonight, but we're going to do it for the whole time, is talk about Imam Al-Nawawi and the book itself, inshallah. And then next week, hopefully next week we'll be able to enter into the actual introduction to the book. I'll also say that as we enter into the book, we're not going to jump to Hadith number 1. We're actually going to look in detail at the introduction of Imam Al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, and alhamdulillah, we'll talk more about the book tonight. But the way that we're going to structure these classes is that I have to balance, because we still are using the space, and we discussed this, using the space of the university. And so because of that, students might come in and we have to make it attainable to them to where they can understand what's going on, if they come into a class. So and not only that, but if we went into a very detailed lesson, then perhaps it is the case that somebody might get bored because we're taking too long. And so I'm trying to balance it between a level of technical information, which we're going to get into, but also keeping it at a level where we can make it through the text in a timely fashion. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. It might be we might be here until the summer, or maybe even after the summer, going over the text, but I'm going to try to do it in a way that we can move through it, inshallah ta'ala. So one of the things about the Arba'un is that I don't see it as just a hadith book, and I'm not going to teach it as a hadith book. I see it as a practical primer to the hadith sciences. So, for example, I believe that Imam Al-Nawawi, he introduces the subject matter of mustaleh in the introduction, without ever mentioning it, but I believe that he brings enough elements through the introduction to where we're forced to discuss them. For example, he mentions, in passing, and somebody could say, oh, well, it's no big deal, but he mentions that he only uses Sahih Hadith. Well, what is a Sahih Hadith, right? And so we're going to look at that. And he mentions the ruling of Da'if Hadith, and so we're going to look at that. And so we're going to look at all of these things. And then once we scratch the surface of what is this science called mustaleh, what is this science called the nomenclature of Hadith, then we're going to go through the Hadith and we're going to actually get hands-on applied knowledge. And what I mean by that, so for example, if you were to study archaeology and they tell you, okay, if you dig this deep you'll find these things, if you dig this deep you find these things, if you find this kind of pottery it's an indication of this age, if you find this kind of pottery it's an indication of that age, and the like. The same way you can read a book about the nomenclature of hadith, what is sahih, what is hasan, what is da'if, and so forth and so on, but through the 40 hadith you actually you attain a hands-on approach. When you study archaeology, you can learn these things, but it's not until you actually go out on a dig and move some of the earth away and start digging things, pulling things from the earth and investigating, actually feeling the pottery for yourself, that you get a true appreciation for that. And so I see the 40 hadith of Imam Al-Nawawi as a hands-on, practical application of the nomenclature of hadith. And in this way, I have my own basis for this. It's my own relationship with the book, and having these discussions with my teachers and so forth and so on. But there's 13 different types of hadith There's 13 different types. What I mean is, there's Sahih, there's Hasan, there's Hasan bi ghayrihi, there's Athar from the companions, there's Zaid, yani, where there somebody has increased, they added words to the narration. There's all of these different types. There's 13 different types of hadith found in the Arba'un. There's 25 narrators, meaning 25 companions, and these are the major companions who narrate hadith. There's 11 rawi, compilers, 11 compilers of hadith. So the six, from the Sahih Sita, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah. You have also the Imam Malik and his Muwatta, and you have 11 of these compilers that Imam Al-Nawawi is going to bring in this collection. So you're familiar with, I don't want to say all of the major compilers of hadith, but the major names in the science of hadith that all Muslims should be familiar with, all students anyway should be familiar with. They're here, and from all 42 of these 42 hadith, they come from 7 different collections. And so these 7 different collections, you have Bukhari, Muslim, we just mentioned them. But what's more than that, you have the Jami'a, you have the Sunan, you have the Musnad, you have the Hizb, you have all, or the Juz, you have all, not Hizb, Juz, but you have all of these different types of collections as well. And so Imam Al-Nawawi, he brings all of this wide variety. I don't believe that it's just haphazard. I don't think it just happened that way. I believe that Imam Al-Nawawi is a genius, and I don't believe that he just happened to do this. I believe that this was something that he intended, and he intended for this small book not just to be a collection of hadith, but rather to be a vehicle by which one can practically study the hadith sciences. And so we're going to do that, and hopefully by the end of these classes, not only will you be familiar with Islam and our deen and the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, but more than that, you'll actually be familiar with the hadith sciences and the importance of the sciences, inshallah ta'ala. On top of that, the way that I teach the book, the way that I've divided the book for myself, and this is the way that I've taught it a few times now, is I break it down into 10 chapters, and they're not even chapters. So, for example, you have the chapter on freedom and its limits. That's going to be one hadith, the 30th hadith. That's the only hadith in it. Then immediately after that, you have the chapter on zuhud, asceticism, and that's one hadith as well. That's hadith number 31. And so, alhamdulillah, the first chapter is the chapter on establishing the foundations of the religion, and that's hadith number 1 through 8. And so, alhamdulillah, in this way, we break it down in such a way that we can look at the global topics. And one of the reasons that I do this is because it allows us to look at a group of hadith and understand them in relation to one another. But another reason that I do this is because it allows us, we can look at a group of hadith, take a general understanding, and then break down each hadith in detail as well. And so it allows us to get through the text in a timely fashion, because if we took one hadith by one hadith by one hadith and explored it well, then we would be here for a very long time, inshallah. And so this way, by breaking it down into these 10 chapters, it gives us a format by which we can enter in and approach the book, inshallah ta'ala. And so this is what we'll be doing as we move ahead. And because so we have an outline, inshallah. So the first chapter is the general foundations. This is hadith 1 through 8. The second chapter is, and again, I want to be very clear, these are my chapters, nobody else, I'm saying this because I don't want you to think Sheikh so-and-so did this. And no, this is just something I came up with as an aid for myself in teaching. And again, this is what I witnessed in the book itself, inshallah. So the second chapter is caution and deen. And that's hadith number 9 through 13. And then it's taqwa and good character, and that's 14 through 20. and then the fourth chapter is the realities of Deen and the ease in it, and that's Hadith 21 through 26, and then it's true righteousness and good deeds. What is true righteousness? What is good deeds? And that's Hadiths 27, 28, and 29. And then the sixth chapter is freedom and its limits, as I mentioned. That's Hadith number 30. Then Zuhud, as I mentioned, that's Hadith number 31. Sharia, maxims and social laws, that's Hadith 32, 33, and 34. What is brotherhood in Islam? That's Hadith number 35 and 36. And then the heart softeners are from 37 to the end. And so this is, how we broke it down, and this is how we'll be explaining it, taking group by group by group, inshallah ta'ala, and unfolding them. But it's going to be at least this week and 2 more weeks. So it'll be 3 classes. The 4th class will be when we start taking the hadith, I believe. I don't see us doing it before the 4th week, inshallah. So this week is an introduction to the book and Imam Al-Nawawi, as well as our format, which is what we're doing now. And then after that, inshallah, we'll get into the introduction, and that's going to take us some time, 2 weeks at least, inshallah. What I would say is that as we study this book, as we start to study this book, and then for the rest of your lives, honestly, I don't see any reason to slow down or to stop or anything else. We should do a khatam of the Arba'un every week. Right? We should be doing a khatam every week, meaning that you finish it, you start again, you finish it, you start again, you finish it, you start again. And the way to do that is by reading 6 hadith a day. Anybody can do this. It doesn't take 10 minutes to read 6 hadith. And so we set aside that time to pick up the Arba'un and just read 6 hadith every single day. And think about it, reflect upon it, but that's your daily reading, and then go over it. And if you do this, you finish the book 50 times in a year, 50 times every year. By the end of the year, you'll be very familiar. If you didn't memorize it, because it's easy for some, it's more difficult for others. If you didn't memorize the text, at least you've grown so familiar with it that you know it, and it becomes a part of who you are. It becomes a part of your worldview, a part of how you perceive things. And more than that, when you have finished this book 50 times, it becomes the bedrock, the foundation upon which you stand. And so, along with your daily recitation of the Quran, and all of us should have a daily recitation of the Quran, then we should have this daily reading of hadith. And like I said, 6 hadith, you'll finish it every week. There's 42 hadith, 6 times 7 is 42, however you want to do it, inshallah. But if you say, well, I don't have time, I don't have time for 6 hadith every day, I'm so busy, I forget, whatever the case might be, do 3 hadith every day, just 3 hadith, and then you would finish it every other week. That's twice a month. Every month you would finish the book twice a month. If you can't do that, if you're not able to do that for whatever, I don't see why, especially as students, why we couldn't do it weekly. But if we can't, and we can't do it twice a week, then at least do it once a month. Read 1 hadith. If it's a long hadith, read 1 hadith. For the short hadith, read 2 or 3 a day. And then, limit yourself, and so that you finish it every single month. 1 to 2 hadith a day, you can finish it monthly. Now, the thing is that if you can't even do that, then as a group, right, get peers together, have friends over, whatever the case might be, and do have a tea day. I don't know. But have some event where your friends, every month you guys have a set day. Just say the 3rd Saturday of the month or something like that. Everybody comes over, you have a meal, you sit down, you eat, you read the Arba'un, and then after you finish the book, everybody eats, has some tea or something like that. This way, if you can't do it, if you can't build your schedule yourself, to be consistent in finishing the book, at least this way you have a social network where you can do it together and strengthen and support each other, inshallah. And also, by tying it to that social gathering, you're more likely to do it. If you're not going to do it any other time, then do it in a way where you have a kind of social support back for that. And if you don't do it once a month, then really you're being neglectful. And if that's your case, then the only thing I could say is, at least at the very minimum, finish it during Ramadan. Right? At the very minimum, finish it during Ramadan. But I would say to you, you should be, and the group here, I think that every single one we don't really have an excuse. I think that, once a week or once every other week, and don't do less than that, inshallah. That's my advice to you. Because again, this gives you familiarity. And one of the things about the text that, who is the word author, it shares the root with authority. And it means you have an authority over this book. But once a person writes a book, they actually lose authority over their book. And so you have people that will read your book and they'll comment on your book and they'll say, well, this means this and this means that. And they might actually know your book. I can almost guarantee that there's people on this university campus that know Shakespeare's works and understand them better than Shakespeare did. Right? Because they spend their time studying it. They've become more of an authority than Shakespeare himself. And so I'm saying this to say to you is that what you want to do is you want to make the Arba'un yours, right? You want to be the authority in your own life. I mean, I'm not saying you walk around, telling everybody you're the authority of the Arba'un, but I'm saying in your own life, in your own circles, in your own spheres of responsibility, you own this book. This is your book. And I don't mean you have a copy of it. I mean you know it, and you know it and you understand it. You want to be an authority over this book. You want to have it and make it your own. And so I say this because it might get boring reading it again and again, but there's a wisdom behind it. There's a wisdom to possessing it in this way, inshallah, and having and building this relationship with it. And one of the things that I'll say is that, and I don't mean this, there's things that we shouldn't say, but I'm saying this because I want to make it clear. How did I come up with these 10 chapters? Where did this come from? It's because I read it again and again, and I'm looking, what's the wisdom? Why is this here? Why is this here? It's because I spent time with the book. And alhamdulillah, Allah bless me, and perhaps we should begin with this. Allah bless me, I studied this book twice formally with Sheikh Khalil Majdalawi. The first time I received ijazah in this book was from Khabab Ahmed in the UK. After that, I received this book, I studied this book with Sheikh Hassan Al-Katani. I studied the book with Sheikh Muhammad Daniel. I studied the book with, his name's Hassan As-San'ani, right? And so, alhamdulillah, it is from these people that I received my ijazah in this book and studied it completely from beginning to end. And so, alhamdulillah, we don't just take it from one person either. If you can take it from multiple people. I have a section of my bookshelf that's dedicated it has nothing on it except the Arba'un and commentaries, different commentaries. Some of the commentaries are real thin and they're, I don't even know why the person wrote the book. It's like, what was the aim here? May Allah reward them, Ameen. But then, there's also, 3-volume sets, commentaries, and so, alhamdulillah, if you can get commentaries on this book, we want to fill our libraries with Bukhari, we want to fill our libraries with Muslim and, Tirmidhi and all of these other books, but honestly, if you just took these 40 hadith and understood them well, they'd be enough for you. They would be enough for you, along with the Quran, of course. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is the issue of you have to learn fiqh and, all of these other things. But when it comes to the basic character of a Muslim, what a Muslim needs in their life, the 40 hadith has that. The 40 hadith is a complete book for the common Muslim. And so, like I said, we should have a khatam of it so that we understand it, we come to know it well, we build a relationship with it for ourselves, insha'Allah ta'ala. And so, this is where as we get into the introduction, we're going to look at certain terms. We're going to look at the term hadith. We're going to look at the term sunnah. We're going to look at, of course, the major terms of the science of hadith. What is mutawatir narration? What is a ahad narration? What does it mean to be sahih? What does it mean to be da'if? We're going to look at all of these things, inshallah, as we enter the introduction. And so the introduction is actually going to be technical heavy, right? It's going to be heavy with the nomenclature of hadith. But when we get into the actual hadith themselves, this is when I'm going to lighten up a little bit on that, and we're going to make it more accessible to the public. And the reason being, again, because we're in this space. We have to set the foundation. We have to set the basis from the introduction. But once we get through these next 2 weeks, then we'll be able to make it more accessible for everyone, inshallah. And I'm not saying it's not accessible for everyone, but if somebody just came in and they didn't know what we were talking about, they might be lost on those. But alhamdulillah, when we enter into the hadith, we'll try to make it more accessible, inshallah. So, alhamdulillah, having said all of that, we want to say that there's 3 things whenever you pick up a book that you need to look at, right? And so the first thing that you should know whenever you pick up a book is who wrote it. The second thing you should know whenever you pick up a book is when did this person live, right? When, where, And the third thing that you should familiarize yourself with is why did he write this book? Why this book, right? And so as far as who the author is, obviously that should be written somewhere in the book. A lot of times in the classical books they will say, as we took Kitab Usul ad-Din, the Shaykh rahimahullah, he said, قال العبد الفقير المضطر لربه لرحمة ربه عثمان بن محمد بن عثمان المعروف بابن فدوية تغمده الله برحمته. And so in this way he's saying, who he is. He's introducing the author. But in most of the books today, the author is on the front cover or whatever the case might be. As far as the time that he lived, this will take investigation, but it's always worth it to investigate. And the reason why is because, for example, Imam Ahmed, and this is the example I always go to, Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, he wrote this book called, what's it called? MashaAllah. Usul, was it Allahu Akbar. It's not Usul al-Tawheed, it's I can't remember, Allahu Akbar, I can't remember the name of it. But he wrote this book, and the whole book is actually talking about the Quran is not created. It is the eternal speech of Allah. That's the whole book is about that. And mashallah, it's not coming to me, but in many in many circles, people treat this book as though you have to read it. Like, this is a book you can't miss. This is part of the curriculum, and if you didn't study this book, then you're missing out. You don't understand the Quran and these types of things. But the question is that when was Imam Ahmed? What was going on in his time? Where was he? What was happening? And it's only when you understand the backdrop of when he lived. And we know that he was from amongst the Tabi'in, and it was in his time that the Mu'tazilite was taking root, and they were saying, no, the Quran is creation. They said that the Quran is a book, it is creation. And they were getting the scholars to say this because they were in authority. They had the ear of the Khalifa. They were able to make this thing, try to make this thing popular. And Imam Ahmed was actually standing up for the truth. When he wrote this book, he was writing this treaty in order to defend the truth against the claims of his time. And so without knowing when he lived, right, what was going on in his time period, what influences were playing upon him, without knowing these things, then we think that this book was written because it's something that every single Muslim must know. But we don't face those same arguments today. We don't face those same experiences today. And so though the book has beneficial knowledge in it and is very good, it's not one of those books that should be foremost in our reading, per se.
It's called Al-Aqidah. There's a book called Al-Aqidah.
It's not Aqidah, that's not the name of it.
Could it be fiqh?
No. Usul al-Sunnah. I'm pretty sure it maybe. But by Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal.
Yeah.
Mashallah. Maybe it's Usul al-Sunnah. I'll know. I'll look. I'll check it out tonight and I'll get back, inshallah. But mashallah. Anyway, so the point is that knowing when a person lived, where a person lived, it gives you an understanding of their background. Like you'll pick up, and please forgive me, as it gets late, I start to forget some things, and it becomes a problem. But I believe it's Imam Bayhaqi. It's not Imam Bayhaqi, but it's one of the Aqidah books. It's a lot. Well, it's one of the Aqidah books. They say that you have to make dua for your Amir. Like it's in the book, you have to make dua for your Amir. And this, why was this written? Why is this part of the Aqidah? Is that really part of our Aqidah? Of course it's not part of our Aqidah. But it's written in there because of the persecution that the Imams were facing at the time. If he would not have included something like that, perhaps he would have become in trouble with the authorities in his land. And so knowing where a person is, when a person is, it helps us to understand their work better. As far as understanding why a book was written, what is the purpose of this book, what is the aim of this book, this is what every introduction is supposed to do. That's the purpose of an introduction, is to tell us what was the intention of the author when he wrote it. And this is important as well, even though we as in our generation, we tend to skip introductions. We'll buy a book, we won't read the introduction, we want to get right to the meat of it, right? This is a mistake because you don't understand why it was written, what was the aim of the author, what resources did he use, what is he basing it off of? And so all of these things, and it's important to know these things when you enter the book, because it's through knowing who the author was, knowing when and where he wrote it, knowing why he wrote it, that's going to allow you to understand why he's saying what he's saying in some of those situations. Sometimes you get a book and it's just a general book, but sometimes there's more details that should be known. And so the Arba'un by Imam Al-Nawawi is beneficial to know who the author is, it's beneficial to know when he was, and it's beneficial to know why he wrote the book, inshallah. So Imam, his full name, if you will, he's called Sheikh Muhyiddin Abu Zakaria Yahya ibn Sharaf Al-Hazani, I'm sorry, not Hazani, Al-Hizami Al-Nawawi. Nobody uses Al-Hizami, this is why it's easy to forget, but Sheikh Muhyiddin Abu Zakaria Yahya ibn Sharaf Al-Nawawi, Al-Hizami. We had this conversation the last time we was together. What's the difference between an alim, a sheikh, a mufti, all these titles that people use. And this sheikh is a title that is deserving of honor. It's a title that's deserving of respect and to be used in a respectful way. Unfortunately, in our time, you hear people saying, "Hey, sheikh," to small children, And so sheikh, it comes from the word that means old man, but it's supposed to reflect wisdom and knowledge. And so a person could say, well, when is a person a sheikh? When does a student of knowledge, when do they become a sheikh? And what I've heard is that a person becomes a sheikh when their sheikhs recognize them as sheikhs. So when a person's sheikh takes them as a peer rather than a student, they're still a student, but he recognizes this is Sheikh so-and-so, then this is when he becomes a sheikh. And it's like a doctorate. When you have a doctorate, you don't become even though you have You've gotten all of the education, you've gotten all of the knowledge, you've written your theses, all of these things. Until those other PhDs, until those other doctors have decided you are their peer, you're not considered from amongst their peers. Right? The same way, when the sheikhs decide you are from amongst their ranks, then they will call you sheikh. When sheikhs call you sheikh, that's when you're a sheikh. Right? This is traditionally. But like I said, now it's alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, it is what it is. Muhyiddin means reviver of the deen. That's what it means. And Imam Al-Nawawi, this is called a laqab. No? So basically this like an honorific title. And Imam Al-Nawawi did not like to be called this. Imam Al-Nawawi, he didn't like any of these types of names. He didn't like any honorifics. That's what they're called in English, honorifics. He didn't like any of them, but he especially didn't like to be called Muhyiddin. And he said, even they were calling him this in his lifetime, he said, the deen has never been dead to need revival. Right? And so he was against being called this. But despite the fact that he was against being called this, his peers continued to call him that. And so this name stuck, because even though he said, don't call me that, everybody called him that. Right? And so then we come to Abu Zakaria. Abu Zakaria is his kunya. But Imam, as we'll see, Imam Al-Nawawi never married. And so he never had any children. And so when you have this situation, the Arabs, they like to have these nicknames for each other. It's a very informal name. It's a nickname. It's something that it shows intimacy and closeness. And formal names are used for formality, while nicknames are used for proximity. And so even somebody who didn't have a child would be given these names from sometimes. And so they can be given for different reasons. Abu can also, we know it to mean father, but it can also mean one who possesses. Right? And so, for example, you have Abu Hurairah. He wasn't the father of the cat, right? He wasn't the father of the kitten, but rather he was the one who took care of it, and so forth and so on. Abu Dhar was not the father of the ant. I don't know why he's called Abu Dhar, but this is the name that he has, right? It wasn't because of a child or something like that. This was a name that was given to him. And so they have these names. But you can, if you have a child, then you are automatically Abu or the father or mother of your firstborn child. And it doesn't matter whether it's a male or a female. In the past they would name only after the firstborn male, but this isn't from Islam. In Islam, we name, whether your firstborn child is a male or a female, you're Abu or Fulan.
Wasn't there a saying of the Prophet ﷺ, to be wary or careful of giving people each other nicknames?
No. Be wary about calling someone something that they don't want to be called. Right? So, for example, there was one of the companions, the people called him, his nickname was dung beetle, in Arabic, but it was dung beetle, and he said, don't call him, because it's insulting. Even though it was something that everybody called him as a nickname, it was an offensive nickname. It's something that could hurt his feelings. So these are the names we avoid. So, for example, if you have you have a friend that's overweight, and you call him, for whatever reason, you call him Fats or something like that. I'm trying to think of something. Usually we call him Slim, right? But you call him Fats or something, and this, even though everybody calls him that, and it's cool, he knows it's his name, he knows that you're not coming from a place of unkindness. It still can hurt his feelings. And so these are the types of names that we avoid, inshallah. It's not, in general, even the Prophet ﷺ was called Abu Qasim, right? So this is what we're talking about here, inshallah.
But it doesn't apply to Imam Nawawi being called Muhyiddin?
Muhyiddin. No, see, this is different. This is a honorific. This isn't a nickname. This is like like Imam Ghazali is called Hujjatul Islam, the proof of Islam, and so they had these honorifics at that time. But Imam Al-Nawawi was against it. He said the companions didn't have these honorifics, the Tabi'een didn't have these honorifics. Why are we using them today? It's like the more names you have, the more you boost yourself up. And so they would prop themselves up with these titles, these honorifics. And so he was against it, but even more than that, he was against being called Muhyiddin specifically because of what it means. But with the people who are calling him that, it's not a name that's insulting. It's not a name that's hurtful. It's an honor, and so this is something else, something else, inshallah. Is the difference clear?
So it's just kind of like it's acceptable if it's an honor,
exactly,
but not for
if you're propping someone else, if you're propping someone up, that's acceptable. If you're putting someone down, even if you don't mean to, that's what's we're told to leave that, inshallah. So there's one other way that a person can be given. Well, there's actually several ways that they could be given a kunya, but Imam Al-Nawawi never had a child. He never married, and so where did his name come from? So one of the places that it can come from, and this isn't the case with Imam Al-Nawawi, but we'll mention it. One of the places that it will come from is that if you have a niece or a nephew, so your first niece or your first nephew, you would become, if you don't have any children of your own, you will become Abu or the name of your first niece or nephew. And so the most famous example of this, who knows the most famous example of this?
I don't remember the name, but it was the firstborn healthy child from Medina, from the immigrants.
That's correct. He just gave you a huge clue.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. So it's our mother, Aisha radiallahu anha, right? What's her kunya?
Right, yeah.
Her kunya is Abdullah, right? And why? Because her sister Asma and Zubair ibn Awam had, as he said, the first healthy child born in Medina to the immigrants was Abdullah ibn Zubair. And so she's named Abdullah, the mother of Abdullah, who was her nephew, because the aunt and the uncle take the place of the mother and the father, meaning they have the same rank as the mother and the father. And so, alhamdulillah, this is another way. But this isn't why Abu Zakaria is called Abu Zakaria. He's actually called this because in lieu of these ways, one of the ways that they would do it is that if your name was Ismail, if your name was Isaac, as an example, they wouldn't call you Isaac Abu Yaqub, right? They wouldn't call you Abu Yaqub. They would call you Abu Ibrahim, right? And so the names of the prophets, they would inverse. So the son would be named after, like Abu, father. So who is the father of Yahya? The prophet Yahya. Zakaria, right? The Prophet Zakaria, alayhim salam. And so in this way, Imam Al-Nawawi's formal name is Yahya ibn Sharaf, right? And so rather than call him, they named him Abu Zakaria because Zakaria is the father of Yahya, the prophets. And so it's a play on words. All of that, I went through all of that just to say that his name is Abu Zakaria, but we have to understand where this comes from because he was never married, he never had any children, inshallah. Yahya is the name given to him by his father, and his father's name was Sharaf. That was his father's name. So his formal name, if you will, is Yahya ibn Sharaf. Al-Hizami is the tribe that he was a part of. And then Al-Nawawi, he's called Al-Nawawi because he was born, raised, died in the village of Nawah, which is, I don't know the distance, but I think it's about an hour and a half drive maybe between an hour and a half and 3 hours. I don't remember. It's been a while. Outside of Damascus. He was born in the year 631 after the Hijrah, the 7th year of the the 7th century of the Islamic calendar. And the 7th century of Islam, especially in his region, it was a very active time. I mean, it was an active time in general, but especially in Balad al-Sham. Because what happened, this is the century, in fact, it happened right before Imam Al-Nawawi, right around the time he was born, actually, that the Crusaders were kicked out of Balad al-Sham completely. So this is the century that saw the Crusaders actually, the last of the Crusaders, exiting from Balad al-Sham. But at that same time, or around that same time, you have the Mongols starting to invade from the east into the lands of the Muslims. And so they reached all the way in the time of Imam Al-Nawawi, or right after the time of Imam Al-Nawawi, they reached all the way into Baghdad. And then from Baghdad they started pushing, and Baghdad at the time was the seat of the caliphate. It was actually the center of Islam, and so the Muslims had to flee from Baghdad, and they were fleeing towards towards the west, towards Syria and through these lands. So you had an influx of people coming in, and the Mongols are coming through and invading these regions. And so, alhamdulillah, all of this transpired in that year, in that century. But more than that, you also have amazing scholarship rise during that century, both before Imam Al-Nawawi and after Imam Al-Nawawi. And we would say that Imam Al-Nawawi, in my opinion, he's the greatest scholar of that entire century. That's my opinion. But you also have luminaries like Ibn Taymiyyah, who was in that century. Ibn Kathir was in that century. Ibn al-Jawzi was in that century. All of these people were in that century. And regarding Ibn Taymiyyah, he actually entered into the school the same year that Imam Al-Nawawi, or maybe a year before Imam Al-Nawawi left the school. And so the scholars, they have this argument. No, it's not an argument. It's kind of like just a discussion, like, I wonder if, because there's no proof. Did Ibn Taymiyyah ever sit with Imam Al-Nawawi? Because he was at the school at the same time as Imam Al-Nawawi. So there is a possibility, not only that they met, but that Ibn Taymiyyah sat with Imam Al-Nawawi for classes. But Ibn Taymiyyah was just entering his studies at that point. So Allahu A'lam, Allah knows best. Right? So regarding the upbringing of Imam Al-Nawawi, we don't know if he had any siblings. No siblings are ever mentioned, and so the assumption is that he didn't have any siblings. His mother and his father both outlived him, and his father was a merchant in the market, but he also, and this is the argument, this is the discussion, because we're not really sure, it's hard to understand, did he have a small farm or a really large garden, right? But basically, he grew all of the food for the family. All of the food that the family ate came from his garden farm, whatever size it was. And also, we understand that he took some of these products to the market as well to sell. Imam Al-Nawawi's mother, and we don't know her name. As far as I know, we don't know her name. His mother, she actually made the clothes, and she would cook the food for the family, and she would also make the clothes for the family. And so, she helped out in this regard. While the husband is in the marketplace, she would be tending, these matters. Both of them are known for their piety and uprightness, despite the fact that we don't know much about them. Despite the fact that really what I'm saying to you is all that's known. Right? There's little more details. But Imam Al-Nawawi, when he was 10 years old, first and foremost, let's say he finished memorizing the Quran before he became pubescent. Right? Before he was pubescent, he finished the hifz of Quran. when he was 10 years old, his father took him into the market and started to teach him how to deal with business. He actually had him working in the marketplace between the ages of 10 and 18. He helped his father in the market. And one of the things that, just to point out is that we talk about child labor laws and, all these things. But we have to be people who we're raising adults. We're raising the next generation of men and women. We don't want to raise infants who become toddlers, who become children, who become adolescent, who become youth, who become young adults, who become, at what point do they become adults? At what point do they become strong individuals, independent? And this is a problem. This is actually a crisis that we see in our time. And I know, and no offense to anyone, but, we hear millennials cry a lot, about the economy so bad. Look at what our parents left us. How did they do this to society and then leave it to us? But the fact of the matter is that their parents didn't have it any better, right? And I know I'm speaking from experience. We didn't have it any better than the generation that's coming up now. But the difference is that our parents will put a whooping on us. That's first of all. Secondly, our parents didn't, they tell you, go out. If you get hurt, get up, dust yourself off, and keep going. The third thing is that we didn't have video games like the video games today. The fourth thing, we didn't have the internet like we have the internet today. The fifth thing is credit cards wasn't as available as they are today. All of these things that are distractions and easements for the current generation has raised up a generation that, they're not, part of it's the parents' fault, but it's the parents' fault because the parents, and I made this statement, I guess last week somewhere. I said that, how many people are becoming parents, they raise their kids, and their idea of raising their kids is, I want to be a cool parent. Right? I want my kid to think I'm cool. I want to be friends with my kid. And so they give them what they want. They spoil them. They make everything easy on them. Instead of doing their job as a parent and raising the next generation, taking care of this amana and preparing it well. And so I'm saying all of this because we have, Imam Al-Nawawi was in the marketplace from the age of 10 on. He's learning how to be a man. He's learning how to deal in business. And that doesn't mean that, he got in there and his dad's making him work. No, his dad's showing him the ropes. He's teaching him slowly. And this is what's necessary. We have to be people who raise our children to be serious-minded. I mean, there's a time for this and a time for that. But at the same time, we have to be mindful of these things and raise our children. And the example that I like to give is Usama ibn Zayd was 17 years old. He was only 17 years old when the Prophet ﷺ handed over the reins of an entire army that was set out to fight against the Romans. He made a 17-year-old the general in his army. Now, is this wrong of the Prophet ﷺ? Absolutely not, because this 17-year-old was prepared well. He was prepared for that. He was raised to be mature. He was raised to be intelligent. He was raised to get up and put in the work, And so, alhamdulillah, this is, we have to be mindful of this. And stop thinking about things in the modern liberal way and start thinking of it more in in the last 10,000 years, man has done it a certain way, and all of a sudden we think we can reinvent the wheel. If it's been successful for 10,000 years, what makes us think that our way is better, So, alhamdulillah, anyway, and my political comments for the class, right? So, anyway, the point being is that, this Imam Al-Nawawi's father took him out and had him working in the market from 10 to 18. But in that time, Imam Al-Nawawi also was studying. Not only was he working, he was also going and sitting with the local scholars. So by the time he was 18, he had actually taken all of the knowledge that was available to him in Nawah. He finished his Islamic studies in his village. And Alhamdulillah, there's a beautiful story that tells us about Imam Al-Nawawi as a child, where there was a sheikh coming through the town, just passing through, and his name was Sheikh Marakashi, and he saw these kids playing in the street, and one of the boys was standing there in the middle crying, crying amongst the other boys. All the other boys are laughing and playing and having a good time, and there's one boy that's just crying. And the sheikh walks up to him and he says, what's wrong? Well, why are you crying? Are you hurt? And the boy says, no. He says, they're making me play. Right? They're forcing me to play. He didn't want to play. This is Imam Al-Nawawi, when he was around 11 years old. He was out in the street crying because the other boys are making him play with them. And he didn't want to play. He wanted to study. Alhamdulillah. And so Imam Al-Nawawi, the way that his father taught him, and later he actually said this to his students, and this is how we have it to in our time, is Imam Al-Nawawi. And if you don't remember anything else from this class, this is the key. This is a key to really enriching your life. Really, and in fact, I would say that this is the key to manifesting the reality of the hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Min husni Islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'nihi." From the excellence of one's Islam is that they leave that which doesn't concern them. Imam Al-Nawawi said, this is what he told his students. This is how he was raised. If you're not doing something to benefit your akhirah, at least be doing something to benefit your dunya. Right? If you're not doing something to benefit your akhirah, at least be doing something to benefit your dunya. Meaning, don't waste your time. If you're doing something, and if I come in and I say, what you up to? You say, nothing. Allahu Akbar. How is that? If somebody says, I'm bored. Well, how in the world could you be bored? What are you doing? I don't know. You don't know what you're doing? And we hear these answers. And the fact of the matter is that we should know, we should occupy ourselves from the time we wake up until the time we go to sleep, making sure that if we're not doing something for our akhirah, at least we're doing something for our dunya. And so you say, well, what about downtime? Okay, sit down and do dhikr. Just relax. Do some dhikr. But we should always be benefiting ourselves. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ said in another narration, he said what means that if your today is the same as your yesterday, then you've lost. If your today is the same as your yesterday, you've lost. We should be people who are constantly trying to improve and benefit in our condition, inshaAllah ta'ala. So, alhamdulillah, this is Imam Al-Nawawi. When he was 18 years old, his father took him to Damascus, where he went to study at the Madrasa Rawahiyya. And this was a new madrasa. It had just opened. And at that time, successful business people, the Prophet ﷺ said, be a scholar, or be a student, or be somebody who listens to knowledge, or be a lover of knowledge. Don't be the fifth, right? And the fifth meaning that, somebody who neglects knowledge. So be a scholar, be a student, be someone who listens, like somebody who goes and listens to lectures and things like that, or be a lover of knowledge, and don't be the fifth. And the people at that time, they enacted upon that. So businessmen, they weren't scholars, they weren't students, maybe they pick up a lesson or whatever, but they were lovers of knowledge. And so they would take their wealth and they would invest it in schools. They would open schools, they would sponsor students, they would sponsor teachers and the like. And so even though they personally couldn't study, they personally didn't increase in knowledge per se, they would utilize their wealth, they would utilize their time to enable the students and scholars to perpetuate this deen, alhamdulillah, and protect it for that matter. And so a wealthy businessman had just opened this school, And Imam Al-Nawawi, when I say opened it, I mean he paid for it, and he wasn't the board. And that's another thing. Sorry, another political comment. Just because somebody puts their money into something doesn't mean that they're an authority over it. And so when you invest in the masjid, that doesn't mean you get to be on the board. When you invest in the madrasa, that doesn't mean you get to be on the board, inshallah. You put your money in it for the sake of Allah, because you're hoping for reward in the hereafter, not because you're hoping for political authority by through your money, inshallah ta'ala. So anyway, this businessman, he opened up this madrasa. Imam Al-Nawawi is one of the very first students to enter into the madrasa. The room that he gave him, the room that they gave him to stay in, I feel comfortable saying that the dimensions that are given is probably from the door to this wall and over. This was his room. Right, and he didn't have any furniture in the room whatsoever. And over the years, the only thing that he accumulated in his room was books, and that was his furniture as well, was books. And it said that when people would come and visit him, they would have to rearrange his books and use them as furniture, because there was no place to sit in his. There was nothing in his room except him and his books. And even when he became Sheikh Muhyiddin, even when he became this great sheikh, he still stayed in that room. So for 20, maybe 25 years, that was the room he stayed in. From the time he was a student, and even after being this great, tremendous sheikh, that's where he lived. He never got a bigger room, furniture, anything like that. The first 2 years that he studied, from the time he was 18 to the time he was 20, he would take 12 sessions every day. Right? And a session then is just like a session at university now. It might be 45 minutes, it might be an hour and a half, but in this window. And so he would take 12 sessions every day. And how, I don't know. But he would memorize his lessons, he would review his lessons, he would say his, establish his 5 daily prayers, whatever sunnahs he prayed, take care of whatever needs he had, right? He did all of that, plus 12 sessions a day, mashallah. And he did this every single day, and he fasted almost every day as well for that 2 years. It said that Imam Al-Nawawi, for these 2 years, he never went to sleep laying down. He never went to sleep on his side, meaning that he would be studying, and then, he'd fall asleep when his body took its rights from him. But he never laid down to go to sleep in this period. When he was 20, his father came and took him away, and they went on Hajj together. Then after he performed his Hajj, and this is the only Hajj that he performed in his life, after he made the Hajj, after he visited the Prophet ﷺ, he returned and he spent 4 more years studying in the madrasa the same exact way that he spent the first 2 years. So a total of 6 years, like that, 12 sessions a day, no falling asleep on his side. And alhamdulillah, the ulama, they said he learned more in those 6 years than most scholars learn in their entire life. We see he used his time wisely, alhamdulillah. So, alhamdulillah, Imam Al-Nawawi was extremely scrupulous. He was a zahid. And I want to say here is that we can have in our hearts a desire to be like Imam Al-Nawawi. We can have in our hearts a desire, I want to live like he lived. I want to go through I want to fast almost every day and never go to sleep on my side and have 12 sessions a day. We can want that for ourselves, but I'm telling you, it takes a special person. This is not your choice to make. This isn't something that you choose for yourself. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to whom He wants. Imam Al-Nawawi, as we saw from the time he was a youth crying in the street because they was making him play, from that time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates this in the person. Allah chooses who is going to be like this and who is going to be like this. There's people who I know scholars, and they're young. Some of them are younger than me, and I'm like, subhanallah, I don't know. I probably, what he forgot is probably what I know, mashallah. And because these are people who they memorize complete books, and I don't mean a small book like the Arba'un or Kitab Usul Ad-Din. I mean these are people who memorize the Quran, the Muwatta, Bukhari, and then the books of fiqh, and they have them all in they're walking around with this encyclopedia in their mind, with this library in their mind. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this to whom He wills. And so if a person is given this, then they should be helped, they should be supported, they should be strengthened. And if you're not given this, then you do the best you can. You do the best, you seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you do the best you can. I say this because it's very easy to yearn to have what Imam Al-Nawawi earned, but the fact of the matter is this is something from Allah. It's tawfiq. This is not because this man did this. No, this is because Allah gave blessings to this man. Alhamdulillah. And from the reasons for those blessings is Imam Al-Nawawi didn't eat anything dubious. He owned all the food that he ate. He never ate any food that we're aware of. He never ate any food from Damascus. He never bought anything and ate in Damascus at all. He only ate what his father would bring to him from Nawab. So his father would regularly bring him food. His mother would make these biscuits, ka'ak, yani this like a dry biscuit, and he would eat these. And this is what he would sustain himself off of. And like I said, he fasted most of the time. He had one thobe, as far as we know, he had one thobe and one turban. Both of them his mother made for him. And when that wore out, then she would make him a new one, and he would have the new one. He only had one garment at a time. He didn't have any, any furniture or any adornments or anything like that. His adornments were his books. His furniture was his books. Alhamdulillah. So this is who Imam Al-Nawawi was. And when he became this great scholar, there was a fitna in his age to where, as I said, there was a lot of political turbulence, and there was a new Sultan Ba'abar, and this Sultan surrounded himself with some Hanafi jurists, and they decided that, and I don't know if it was the Hanafi jurist's idea or if it was the Sultan's idea and he just surrounded him with yes men. Whatever the situation, they decided that any of the awqaf in their land, in Balad al-Sham, comes under the direct authority of the Sultan, so he can use it any way he wants. What's waqf? Endowment. No, jazakallah khair. So any endowment that fell in their lands, he could use it any way he wants. It's completely under his authority. And any lands that was owned, if you didn't have papers for it, then you would have to pay the government rent. So even if this farm, this land belonged to this family for 1,000 years, if they didn't have a deed, if they didn't have official papers, then they had to pay the state rent on that land or taxes on that land. And so in this way, they were making it very difficult for the people. And the scholars tried to argue, but they got shut down very quickly. So they all turned to Imam Al-Nawawi, and they basically petitioned him to deal with this issue. And he wrote several scolding letters to the Sultan, showing him why it was wrong, proving to him that what he was doing was unjust. And so the Sultan called some people together, and he said to them, this guy is a nuisance. Cut his stipend. Stop paying him. Right? And so they looked at one another and they told the Sultan, they said, there's a problem. He never accepts a stipend. He doesn't accept the stipend. So he lived there, he taught in the university for over 20 years, and he never took any pay for it. There are occasions we know that he took money, but he utilized that money to buy books. And I'll tell you how we know that momentarily, inshallah. So he never took payment for his teaching. For 20 years he taught at the madrasa, and he never accepted any money for it. Never. Right? And so, alhamdulillah, they said, well, the Sultan said, how does he live? How does he maintain himself? They said he eats the food that his father brings him. He wears the clothes that his mother makes him. And so he said, well, what are we going to do? They decided that they would exile him. And so they made an order where Imam Al-Nawawi had to leave from Damascus. They kicked him out of Damascus. And so what he did is he visited his teachers, those dead and those alive. He went to the graveyard and said goodbye to his teachers, that he would not be, because he's exiled, he can't come back. So he went to the grave, he said bye to them, And then he went to the living scholars and said bye to them. He took the books that were in his room and he gave them all to the madrasa. He gave them all to the library of the school. And this is how we know he took some money, right? Because he said when he gave the books, he said, these aren't my books. He said it was the money from the university. I keep saying university. He said it's the money from the school that paid for them, so they belong to the school. Right? And so all of the books that he had, he gave them all to the school. And so he took what he had, basically himself, and he went and he visited Beit al-Maqdis. He went to Jerusalem, Quds. He visited Beit al-Maqdis, and then he, on his way home to Nawah, he became ill. And when he got home, he was sick for a couple of weeks. His mother and father took care of him, but ultimately he passed away. After 27 years in Damascus, so he went when he was 18, he lived there for 27 years, he was exiled, he went to Beit al-Maqdis, from there he went back to his family's home, he fell ill, and he passed away on Saturday, the 24th of Rajab, in the year 676 after the Hijrah. He was around 44 or 45 years old. He was around 44 or 45. Most people say he was 45 years old. Now, this is the thing, is that all of his efforts, his sincerity, his zuhud, his purity, his worship, right, all of these things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a tawfiq that I don't know anyone in the entire ummah after the companions that has the tawfiq that he has. I don't know anyone. And if you look at Imam Bukhari, so somebody could say Imam Bukhari, right? And I would say to you, there are people that want to burn the Jamia of Bukhari. They want to burn this book because they say that there's mistakes in it. They say what they say. There's people who accused Imam Bukhari of being on the wrong aqidah in his time, right? This is Imam Muslim actually stood up and defended Bukhari in a group in a learning against his own teacher, against one of his own teachers, because these people were attacking Imam Bukhari, saying that his aqidah was off, right? Imam Ghazali, we know that in every century there is a reviver of the deen, a mujaddid, and every century there's different mujaddids, different people have different opinions of who it is, except in the 6th century of Islam, no one disagrees that it was Imam Ghazali. He was the reviver of his period. There's no disagreement that I'm aware of concerning that. And yet still people say about him that the Ihya al-Ulumuddin should be destroyed, leave it, ignore it, right? Rather than the reviver of the hearts, it's the killer of hearts. This is what people say. And so I don't know anyone, even these great scholars that we all come to know and love and appreciate, all of them were attacked. All of them, there's a group of people who say don't read their books. There's a group of people who said we should destroy their books, leave their books, forget their books. There's a group of scholars who accuse them. Imam Al-Nawawi is universally accepted. There's no group that attacks Imam Al-Nawawi. There's no group that attacks his works. In fact, what's beautiful is that he wrote the Sharh of Imam Muslim's book. And so when you pick up Imam Muslim's collection, the Sahih, when you pick up his Jamia, then what happens is you have titles like Imam Bukhari's titles. Imam Bukhari put his title there, and then he brought hadith to support his claim. The title is the claim, and then the hadith support it. Imam Al-Nawawi didn't bring Imam Muslim didn't bring a single title in his book. Qadi Iyad first put some titles here and there, but then Imam Al-Nawawi took that, and he's the one that wrote every single title in the Sahih of Muslim comes from Imam Al-Nawawi. He's the one that did that. He wrote the commentary that's used to this day, the what do you say, not the leading, the authoritative. The authoritative commentary of Sahih Muslim is from Imam Al-Nawawi. So when he wrote about hadith, it's accepted. Right? When he wrote about the Quran, the etiquettes of carrying the Quran, it's accepted. When he wrote about fiqh, they call him like little Shafi, the little Imam Shafi, because his opinions in the school take rank. And so you have Minhaj al-Talibin, all of his books, Al-Maqasid, his fiqh books are accepted. Nobody rejects his fiqh books. You have his Bustan al-Arafin, his book on Tasawwuf, it's accepted. You have Riyadh al-Salihin, everyone reads Riyadh al-Salihin. You have, subhanAllah, my point being is that every single book that he wrote on every topic, Hayat al-Nabi, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, all of these books, they're not just preserved, but they're universally accepted. And not only are they universally accepted, every language that Islam gets translated into, his books are translated into that. So we have all these books in English as well, right? And so this is an indication that he was accepted. And like I said, I'm not trying to boost him more than anybody. I personally don't know anybody else that is accepted the way Imam Al-Nawawi is accepted. There's something special there. And alhamdulillah, we'll see it as we progress through, inshaAllah ta'ala. As for this book, he introduces it well himself. And so we're going to really focus on his introduction. But what I'll say before I close out is simply that, this book is a book that contains, and he says this, that it contains maxims. So the scholars will say this is half of Islam, this is a third of Islam, this narration is 1/4 of Islam. That's all of the narrations in his Arba'un they have this weight. They're considered universal maxims or pivotal narrations in the deen of Islam. And what's more, he says in the introduction, he says anybody who is serious about attaining success in their deen and in the hereafter must know this book. They have to know this book well. And I believe that. And this is again why I go back to the fact that we should be doing a khatam of it on a regular basis, inshallah ta'ala. And I think that for trying to condense it into an hour, I think that this is a good introduction to who Imam Al-Nawawi was. And if there's any questions, inshallah, we'll answer the questions. Though I didn't get into the text itself very much, we'll do that next week, inshallah ta'ala. Now, any questions? سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك